Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's Dave Hutchinson again at Cause Leadership Podcast, and I am really excited to have our guest today, Tim Cestnick, who known for a number of years and through different connections. But Tim, really grateful to have you on the podcast today, and we look forward to our conversation.
Well, I'm honored that you actually invited me, David. I'm just this is going to be fun. So thank you for asking me.
Great. And for those who don't know a lot about Tim, he's a prolific writer. He's a Globe and Mail columnist, has been for a number of years now. You'll see a lot of his stuff there. He is the co-founder and CEO of Our Family Office. Tim, you've had quite a remarkable career, frankly, in many respects. You worked at Deloitte. You've built up another company prior to this one and sold it. You're writing. You're the chair of the Burlington Foundation board. So you're busy and doing a lot of stuff, and in all of that, there's a leadership thread that flows through all that you've done over the past number of years. Just wanted to get a sense from you. Give us, what does that thread look like? What does leadership look like in your world? And how's this all drawn together for you?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for asking. I think when I think about leadership, it's funny as you get a bit older, you start realizing that I have a responsibility to be a leader in certain ways. I've been a business owner for a long time, so in that sense, I've led a team of people. But more broadly than that, I think taking responsibility for being a leader, not only in my home, but in our church, in our community. These are things that I take seriously. And, it's led to me contributing to, for example, being on the Burlington Community Foundation. I'm now the chair of the board there. Um, I think I have some things to offer from working with many families over many years and helping them make wise decisions about their money. That philanthropy becomes part of all of that. So I think playing a leadership role in the community, helping them to understand helping the foundation understand how to approach donors and families. That's been part of how I've wanted to give back, and so I've kind of built that into my life.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. Just want to talk to you about philanthropy because obviously that's a big piece of what our audience is about, and whether that be people in professional roles within the charitable space or board members or whoever may be listening. But you've got a unique perspective, I think, on philanthropy. It's certainly one of the pillars of your company, and not the only pillar, but many one of the key ones for sure. And so you've seen from the family office perspective how the families that you work with address philanthropy, what that bigger picture is for them from a financial perspective. Maybe if you can, kind of demystify the family office a bit for us, but also as it relates to working with the families that you work with as far as philanthropy is concerned. Maybe just give us an overview on that.
Sure. So, I mean, my life largely has been helping people make smart decisions about their money. In my earlier part of my career, that was as a tax specialist at the accounting firm Deloitte, and then I moved on from there. Gave up the exciting world of public accounting many years ago to really start a wealth advisory firm. And what we do for families is pretty broad. So it covers off investment management, it's integrated planning, which is tax planning, estate planning, ownership structuring, that type of thing. It's risk management, so that's asset protection planning and insurance planning. It stretches into even family governance. So, if you've got enough wealth where it could go on for more than one generation, and not everybody does, but where it does, you've got that. There's a need to plan for how that's going to happen. How do you, as a parent, how do you leave assets to the next generation, especially if they're going to be co-owned by the next generation? How do they share those assets? How do they make decisions around them? What if they can't get along? Those are the kind of things we try to solve for families before it becomes problematic for them. But then also we look after strategic philanthropy because I've discovered that over the years that families who have had success, for the most part, really want to make a difference. They want to give back. And so I won't say that we did this out of necessity because clients demanded us to, but the reality is it was an opportunity we saw to really focus on this area of philanthropy with families because, like I said, they do want to give back. They don't really know how to do it very well necessarily. It's quite amazing how when you look at the transition from one generation to the next, what we learned from our parents, Some families learn about giving back through what their parents have done and the example they've shown. But even in those cases where parents have been very generous, we've kind of seen sometimes the next generation kids just don't really get it, and it's not important to them. So we kind of looked at that and said, well, what went wrong there? What could have been done better or differently? So we try to advise families in a way where this is a multi-generational approach to giving back, whether it's to faith-based charities, whether it's to just community-based charities, whatever it is. How do we help families do this in a more meaningful way so that it perpetuates along across generations?
Yeah.
Because that's where the impact really becomes meaningful, is when you can pass that along.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to quote you here because this was on your website, so I figured it was quotable. So, strategic philanthropy is really about making a positive and meaningful difference in the world around you in a way that's really meaningful for your family. It all starts with understanding what's important to your family, defining what those values are, and making sure that your giving is aligned with those values. So, when you have when one of your families comes to you and says, "We're interested in being philanthropic, strategically philanthropic," um, what's the first question you ask them?
Well, what we try to do, even before we get to that discussion about philanthropy, and this dovetails into philanthropy, is to understand the family really well.
Yeah,
We have conversations with them for probably, you know, 3 hours, 4 hours, not all in a row, because that would just people would hate that, but getting together 2 or 3 times to talk over a period of 3 hours, 4 hours about what's important to them, where do they see themselves in the future, and when you understand what's important to them, quite often that leads into conversations about, well, are you giving money back? Are you being charitable? And it's quite amazing when you talk about values, what's important to a family, those things that are important to a family, in other areas of life, um, do drift into their giving. And so there's a consistency usually between what's important in their giving and what's important to them otherwise. And we try to understand that about a family. And once you understand that about a family, what's important to them, where do they see themselves in the future? You can start having good conversations about, what are you doing to give back today? And I'll tell you what the default answer is. Well, on December 15th every year, we scramble to give money to a couple of charities because it's coming to the end of the year and we need to save some tax. And and that's usually what happens if people don't plan. So we say, okay, this could be more strategic. That's what we call it, strategic philanthropy. It's not
yeah,
just not ad hoc.
right.
There's something called ad hoc philanthropy, where you're just giving because someone knocks at your front door and says, "Would you like to give to this cause?" And maybe it's something you're okay to support. But really, philanthropy is much more meaningful when you take a different approach to it. So we try to get people away from that December 15th scramble, to start thinking about it all year round, and particularly do that as a family.
Yeah,
So where we can.
yeah,
And there are different tools we use to do that, but it has to come from a place where, they see this as a critical part of their wealth management, not just an afterthought, on December 15th.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, from your perspective and in your own experience, I mean, likelihood donors are giving for different reasons. What is it that you see as a common theme amongst maybe the families that you're working with and others that you know? And are you seeing a shift? Like, is there a shift in the mindset around philanthropy these days?
That's a very good question, and it's an important question, because when you understand the reason you give, why you give, that leads to a lot of other answers. Things like, how much should I give? When should I give? Should I give during my lifetime or the time I pass away, or both? Should I give out of which pocket should I give out of? Should it be my personal pocket, my company's pocket? Maybe you have a family trust, maybe you have a family foundation. So it answers questions like that when you understand the why. And so we actually walk through this with many families, and there's an article, or I guess a paper more accurately, written a number of years ago by a gentleman named Russ Allen Prince out of the US. And I really liked what he wrote. And he wrote about something called the 7 faces of philanthropy. And
Okay. Yeah.
what this really is, the key reasons why people give. And there are really 7 core reasons, and you can have maybe more than one of these will actually apply to you. I'm actually pulling it up here as I'm speaking here. But there may be more than one reason, but some people will give, for example, for faith reasons. Okay. So we call these people the devout, and they're giving because faith is important to them, and their faith leads them to want to give back for whatever reason. And people have different approaches to this and why they do it, but faith is one reason people will do it. Some people are investors, and what I mean by that is, to them, giving back is good for business. So, their business gets credit if their business gives money to a particular foundation or cause, and so that for some people, that's the reason they give back. For other people, they are dynasts, which means giving back really is a family tradition for them. They learned it from their parents. Maybe their parents, if they had the means, might have set up many years, maybe a foundation or a donor advised fund of some kind, where they've set aside some money for the philanthropy, and they've taught that to the next generation. So these families, it's a family tradition. That's a dynast. And then you have people who are repayers, who maybe have received some kind of benefit from the community that they are in because they set up a business in that community and they benefited from that. Or maybe the community might be a particular, not a geographic community, but another type of community. For example, somebody's a professional athlete and they made all their money playing hockey, and now they want to give back to the sport because it was good to them. Those people are repayers. You have altruists who, for them, giving back is just feels like the right thing to do. You have communitarians who believe in giving back to the community that they live in because they reap benefits from being in that community. So these are all faces of philanthropy, and when you understand what your face of philanthropy is, it leads to important questions. For example, if you're an investor and you doing good is good for business, then you're probably going to give out of your business profits, out of your company, not necessarily, and probably during your lifetime or during the lifetime of your business, not necessarily when you pass away and from your personal pocket. It's so, and so those are the kinds of questions that people can ask themselves, and so I really like that approach to understanding your face of philanthropy to lead to more answers.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I think there must be a reference to that article on your website or something like that because
Probably is.
I remember seeing that on the
Well, we
question.
actually, David, we look at the wealth of a family as being broader than just the money. So,
Yeah,
and that's on our website. We talk about what I call 6 types of capital, which really includes spiritual capital, which is the core values of a family. What's important to them, because these types of capital I'm going to tell you about are capital that can pass to the next generation. For sure, there's money. The financial capital can move to the next generation, but the spiritual capital, which is your core values, you hope would also move along to the next generation. So there's the financial capital, there's the spiritual capital, there's human capital, which is the extent to which the next generation is living positive, productive, healthy lives, physically healthy, mentally healthy. And that's not always easy, but if we can help clients, think about those things and do that better, that's great. But human capital is another type of capital. Then there's family capital. That's the extent to which your family are living in productive and positive relationships with each other. That everyone's getting along. They love each other. They're talking to each other. That's a type of capital. Then you have 2 more types of capital. There's structural capital, which is the mess you're leaving behind or not, in the form of companies and partnerships or trusts or unpaid bills or whatever it is you're leaving behind. You don't want to leave a mess for the family or maybe it's too challenging for them. That's structural capital. And then there's societal capital, which
mhm,
is the idea of giving back,
yeah,
thinking about the society, community around you. Maybe it's the church you go to, maybe it's another type of other types of organizations you like to support, but you're thinking about the world outside of you. And that's a type of capital that can be passed along to the next generation too. So when you think about what your legacy is, particularly the spiritual capital, and if you're a person of faith, passing that along is more important than just about any other type of capital.
yeah,
So, but giving back and societal capital or philanthropic capital is also important.
yeah. Oh, that's excellent. Thanks, Tim. The biggest mistakes that people make, and again, this might be the people that you've worked with or others that you know about, but what are those mistakes that some philanthropists make? And what's the effect on them and also on the charities that they support?
Good question. I think the biggest mistake I see people making, this can apply to people who've even given thought to philanthropy. They've put it on. It's been on their minds. They do it regularly. Um, but it's not as meaningful as it could be for them because they haven't given enough thought to what I will call their giving allocation. A giving allocation is kind of like an investment allocation. If you're investing your money, you have an asset allocation. That's simply an asset allocation is your how much money do you put in cash versus stocks versus bonds versus other things. You divide the money up into different categories. And giving can be the same way. So, what's important to you? What's important to your family? What does your giving allocation look like? You might have faith-based charities. You might have, uh, animal welfare, or maybe it's domestic poor or international poor, or maybe it's healthcare, maybe it's education. And there's all these areas you could give to, and it's defining what areas are most important to you. That's the first step. And then from there, you drill down in each of those areas and you say, how much am I giving? What percentage of my giving should go to each of these buckets? This makes it more meaningful, right? So then once you've defined how much goes into the faith-based bucket or the healthcare bucket or whatever, um, and that's different for everybody in terms of how much that's going to be.
Yeah.
Um, Once you've done that, then you drill down and say, now what specific organizations, churches, charities, synagogues, whatever it is, do you want to support in particular? And if you take the time on this kind of planning, all of a sudden your giving becomes more meaningful. It beats the, December 15th scramble to just write a check to somebody who you
Mhm.
think you need to give money to. And the other thing another mistake I see people make, particularly when you're giving away sums that are meaningful to you, many people feel called to give an amount that's sacrificial,
Yeah.
an amount they're not panic stricken about, but an amount that they think is meaningful. And if you're giving away a meaningful dollar amount, don't you want to know how those organizations are, what they're doing with your money? How well are they doing with it? It's following up with them and maybe having the conversation ahead of time to say, what are your greatest needs? Can I help fund some of those specific needs? I had a client one time who was diagnosed with MS. She wanted to help MS, and her first thought was to give money to the MS Society. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then she got to thinking, well, maybe there's some other people out there doing some other things in research for MS that maybe I'd like to support. So we helped her identify some specific opportunities where there was some research being done. She had a conversation with the researcher. She learned what he was doing, and she felt much better about supporting what he was doing, his research. She knew exactly what the dollars were being put towards, and she felt really good about that. So it's doing a bit of homework ahead of time, decide where you're going to give, and then and keep tabs on where you're giving the money and who you're giving it to. I won't say holding the charities accountable, but maybe there's a bit of that. But then your giving becomes much more meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And people just don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And and as you say, the meaningful side of it comes when you've actually got given some good planning to it and been able to articulate why is it that we want to give to these particular charities.
By the way, the other thing another mistake I think people make, because you were asking about mistakes, sometimes they don't give the right thing to charity. What do I mean by that? Well, cash is always good. Charities can use cash, they use money, and they need that. But if you have stocks, bonds, mutual funds that have grown in value and they've appreciated in value, I'm not talking about stuff inside your RSP or inside of registered plans. I'm talking about money outside those plans or even in a corporation. When you donate those types of investments to charity as they've grown in value, so you're giving appreciated investments, the capital gain on those is eliminated. It's set to zero. You pay no tax on the capital gain. And on top of that, you still get your donation tax credit. That's actually a very effective way to give, and people don't think about that very often. So, and along the same kind of lines, sometimes giving things in kind can make sense. Nobody wants to receive your used hockey equipment as a donation, but people might want to give a vehicle or other things. And sometimes just understanding the charity and what they need might lead to other ideas about what you should give.
Yeah. Excellent point. Thanks, Tim. So flip side of a mistake might be not being willing to take enough of a risk in your giving. Maybe too much risk is a mistake, but what's your perspective on Canadian philanthropists today? I know there is, from a foundation perspective, there's billions of dollars tied up in foundations across the country, but I think one of the concerns might be is that money actually being put to use? And and therefore what is the risk that the foundation or the major gift donor is maybe choosing to stay away from if if they're in that position. So just curious, do you see risk aversion or acceptance?
As far as Canadians in general, there's been a trend, and I don't think it's a great trend. Well, it's good. It's good in some ways, but in other ways, it's not. And the trend is that fewer people are giving, but the people who are giving significantly more. So what's been happening is Canadians who have more financial resources are being more generous. They are giving back. We're seeing that. But as far as the percentage of, say, taxpayers out there that are actually making gifts to charity, that number has probably been on the decline for probably the last 10 years. So that part's concerning. And as far as risks go, I think there may be different reasons why people don't give. One of those might be the perception that they don't know how much they can afford to give because they're worried about running out of money. And that is a risk. That's a risk. You ask about risk. But if you have a good handle on where you stand financially, how much you need to look after yourself and maybe your spouse for the rest of your lives, and there are people who can help with that math. It's not that complicated. Then you get a sense about how much you can afford to give. And when you can feel comfortable about that, it eliminates some of that feeling of concern or fear or risk. I think people also sometimes don't give as much as they should because they're concerned about who they don't know who's doing the best work.
Right. Yeah.
And that that's unfortunate, but I think if we take a bit of time to do homework, uh,
Hmm.
there's an organization, by the way, if you're interested in looking them up online, called Charity Intelligence. Charityintelligence.ca. We're members. We're subscribers to that. It's a website you can go and you can look up a lot of different charities in the country, and they've done an analysis on them, so you can kind of see what percentage of their donations go to the cause versus go to administration and whatnot. So, and I'm not saying that's the only fact you should look at, by the way. People
Hmm.
think, oh, it's been too much money administration. Well, the reality is, in some years when donations are not very high because it's a recession or whatever, then the percentage of gifts that come in that goes to administration might be higher than it usually is.
Yeah, sure.
So, so you have to cut some slack, I think, to some charities on that. But I think, doing a bit of homework
Hmm.
makes it more meaningful and it gives you more confidence in where you're giving. But just in general, I think Canadians, by comparison to, say, our American counterparts, American cousins, we're not as generous in terms of how much we give. It might be because the government has traditionally handed out more money to some charities than maybe south of the border, but that's really changing. The government's not funding charities like they used to. Charities are struggling. I hope that people will pick up the mantle and they will start to give more. I think last time I did the math, and it's been a few years since I did the math, the average Canadian probably gave about 1.5% of their income,
Mm. Yeah.
which compared to the US is probably half. That's less than half of what people in the US would give. And certainly, what everyone can afford to give is probably higher than that.
Yeah.
We often talk about 10%, as a benchmark, and I think that's a wonderful aspiration and something we should all be looking to try to achieve. But I'll tell you, some people can afford to give a lot more than that,
Yeah.
and so if they're going to give sacrificially because they make so much. For some people, giving 10% is not a challenge at all, and they should be doing more than that. On the flip side, for somebody who's a very, very low income earner, giving 10% might be more difficult because you're trying to meet the cost of daily living. So for everybody, it's a different number, but everyone has to feel happy and kind of cheerful about what they've given. That's the principle. But try to give sacrificially. That's what I'm trying to encourage people to do.
Yeah. No, that's so important. Thank you. You touched on this a little bit just in the risk question, but the perspective of a donor who maybe doesn't know enough about the charity or is cautious about the charity. I'm curious if in your conversations with some of the families that you work with, is there ever a concern around the leadership of the charity, whether that be the governance of the charity or the executive leadership of the charity? Does that come up in conversations?
Yeah, sure, it does. I think by and large, most people are increasingly giving more thought to that because people are increasingly concerned that the money they're donating is not doing what it should be doing. They want to have an impact, and they're concerned that their impact is not as great as it can be, and that sometimes has to do with the leadership of a charity. I think what charities can do, it's a relationship business. It's building relationships with donors, but being proactive about communication with them, and yes, proactive about the things you're up to, the projects you're working on, whatever it is, those kind of things. But I think you want to build those relationships with those most significant donors and have conversations about the impact that you as a charity are having in the community in which you work. You know, I mean, have those be proactive about having those conversations because that's going to put people at ease. I think
Yeah.
a little bit because it often goes unspoken. Sometimes donations will fall by the wayside a little bit, and you don't know reason why. Sometimes it's just an economic reason. You know, people we're in recession and people are feeling uncertainty. But other times, maybe there's something going on where there's a perception about your charity or whatever, and you just want to kind of get ahead of that and have conversations with donors and share with them what you're really doing and what difference you're making. If you can measure it, if you can provide measurements, like we impacted this number of people last year, or we served this many meals last year, or whatever it is, that makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, and it related to that, so the executive directors or CEOs or the senior fundraisers of some of the charities that you'd be aware of or that your families would be aware of. What what's the best approach to a family who's high net worth, probably on everybody's list as far as wanting to get a donation from them? And you've touched on the relationship piece, and I think that's vital. But how does that happen authentically and not just about trying to get somebody to write a check?
It's a bit of a slow process, I think. You know, I wish I could say just snap your fingers and it's going to happen quickly, but it doesn't work like that very often for because people who have financial resources are often guarded
Yeah,
because they are approached by everybody.
yeah,
So I think what is valuable to families is these kinds of conversations that, you know, about things I'm talking about now. Many of them don't think enough about these things. They don't think about, you know, what is our philanthropic mission? What's important to us? What is our philanthropic giving allocation? But if you come across to them as being a resource where you can help them understand some of these things, help them think through their philanthropy, as opposed to just being someone who comes in and asks for money,
yeah,
you know, be a resource for them. You know, at the Burlington Community Foundation, we want to make a difference in the community. So we positioned ourselves as being a hub for the community where they can understand really a bunch of different things about the community that they don't currently understand. So we're educating people about the community, and that builds awareness of the foundation. But for charities, if you can take an educational approach to families, say, look, we'd like to have you come out to a webinar or something. We're going to talk about will planning. And yes, we'll talk about philanthropy, but we just want you to understand what best practices are, you know, in giving back when it comes to wills. They'll value that, and that will
mm,
put you front and center with them. So if you could take an educational approach to families, because they people who want to give back do want an education and how to do that well.
yeah, yeah,
If it means bringing an outside speaker in, a lawyer who's good with wills, somebody who's an expert in investment management and wants to talk about how to invest your charitable dollars, talk to people and position yourselves as an educator for a resource for them.
okay, yeah, no, good tip. Thank you. You touched on this earlier, and it's obviously a big consideration, especially for high net worth families. But this generational wealth transfer that everybody's anticipating, and I guess is in many respects. But when you think about that, and you think about the next generation, um, and you already touched on it in the sense of parents trying to provide that sort of guidance to the next generation. But what should charities be doing to build an understanding for not just families, but any donors, frankly, across the country that might be looking at what that wealth transfer means to them and how they can contribute that from a philanthropic perspective?
We are seeing probably the biggest transition or transfer of wealth from one generation to the next. We're in the middle of that, and the next decade it's going to continue as boomers age and uh, their children receive inheritances. There's a lot of money in motion. Those are optimal times for families to start thinking about giving back. So, you know, I come back to the idea of educating families. No one is really talking to families about the legacy of giving and how the parents pass that along to the next generation. A big mistake I see, and it surprises me sometimes, we've got some clients who are very generous people. And yet when you talk to the children, it's like they don't quite get it and they don't quite buy into that as much. And I'm thinking, not that's not true of every family. I think some families do it better than others. But I think, to have a conversation with the current generation, matriarch and patriarch of a family, and say, ask them the question, what are you doing to encourage your kids or help your kids understand the importance of giving as part of their lifestyle? Because the true answer is most parents aren't doing very much. It's like, well, they see that we give, that should be enough. No, it's not actually. You need to do more than that. So, number one, if you can build relationships with more than one generation in a family, that's good. Maybe help to equip parents to have those conversations with their kids about why giving is important. Maybe not necessarily giving to your charity, just giving in general. But I think the result of that is going to be your charity and other charities would actually benefit if we were to educate families on how to transition these values from one generation to the next. I would encourage people who are involved in the charitable sector to learn more about the kinds of conversations parents should have with their kids and educate people about that. And then try to connect with the next generation. Individual charities may be a little bit different than foundations, but we can all do similar kinds of work. It's gonna reach out to the parents and the next generation to educate people on what giving back really means, why it's important.
Yeah. And sticking with that sort of generational theme, I know charities are, trying to figure out how does how does a millennial give, or how does a Gen Z give, or now we're getting into Gen Alpha, how are they going to give? That's the question a lot of charities are trying to figure out. And so when you talk about the families that you deal with, and serving the next generation, if you've been able to have conversations with the children, what is it that's drawing them, other than family legacy, but what are they drawn to? What is it that charities need to know from them about how to approach them? Because it's a different approach than it was to the boomers or the builders. And
Yeah. I think one thing is true. I talk about some families don't do a good job of kind of, educating the next generation on how to give, why to give. But on the flip side of that, we are seeing in some families where the children have a very definite views on how they want to make a difference. And it's important to them. I think a lot of kids are concerned about some kids are concerned about different things, right? Some kids are well, in Canada today, many kids are concerned that their lifestyle may not be what their parents actually had. Life's more expensive than it's ever been, to the point where some kids are thinking, should I even have children, or how many kids can I afford to have? I mean, I'd love to see every family have 5 kids, right? But given how expensive life is, so this next generation thinks a bit differently than the generation before it. My kids think differently than I do a little bit. I mean, we're people of faith, so we all share, but other than that, I think the things my kids view as being worthy of support maybe differs a little bit from me. So I think it's trying to understand, what is the next generation looking to give to? And I think the good news is virtually every charity that's out there doing good work is going to find supporters in the next generation. I think that's true. Um, but maybe we all need to do a better job at understanding that next generation and their approach to giving. But I will say that I do believe that they are generous. I've also seen probably the reality is they're probably more balanced in terms of life than my generation even.
sure,
They
yeah,
they want I think they want a more balanced lifestyle. I think they want, and that includes being generous and giving back. Some people are concerned about the environment. Some people are concerned about social justice causes. I mean, every family, depending on their politics and whatever else, looks at things differently. I'm not sure I have one silver bullet, one answer for you that's going to satisfy. I can just tell you that there is a desire of this next generation to give for the most part, but it may look a little bit different than their parents.
yeah, for
So I
sure.
think it behooves us all to understand that better. We're starting to understand that more about our clients' children.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, even the way they invest their money. Some of them will have chosen to invest their money in a way where they're having an impact on in certain ways.
Yeah, I mean, charity is obviously not the only mechanism anymore, right? There is the whole social impact approach or social enterprise approach, and I think that's starting to not only attract talent from the charitable sector over to maybe the corporate side a bit, but those corporations that are authentically entering into having an impact on whether it's their communities or their employees or a combination of the two. So switching gears a bit here, Tim, you brought up the donor advised funds a couple of times in our conversation so far, and I'm curious from your perspective. We're now celebrating DAF Day as part of the whole DAF movement. But maybe just for those that are listening, can you explain what is a DAF? How is it used? And like it seems to be coming into its own a little bit right at the moment. What?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, there can be advantages to using what we'll call a family foundation as a charitable giving vehicle. Certainly, when you get to larger levels of gifts, it can be effective to use a foundation because what it allows you to do is to donate money to the foundation which you've set up or you have access to. You can get the donation tax credit on that day where you scramble on December 15th to put money away. But then you can also, after that, then decide which charities ultimately are going to get those dollars. Now, so there's two types of foundations. There's a private foundation which you can set up, which is not a DAF.
Right.
It's your own foundation. Comes with a lot of. It takes 6 to 9 months to set it up, just to get approval from CRA. There's accounting and bookkeeping and administrative work to do. There's tax filings every year. It's also not very private because anybody can look up on CRA's website every foundation in the country. And if it's your family's foundation, they can look it up and see, oh, how much did you donate? How much did you give to your foundation? So it's not very private. A donor advised fund is slightly different. It looks and feels like a private foundation, but it's not quite a private foundation. It's actually a public foundation. So it's a foundation that the public foundation will be set up. And then within that foundation, you have little sleeves. And each sleeve is maybe a different individual or a different family's, foundation within a foundation.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what we call a donor advised fund. So you can donate to this fund, donor advised fund that you've set up, and you get a donation tax credit just like you would if you donated to a private foundation. But then every year you make a decision about ultimately where does the money go out of that foundation to whatever charities. And the overarching foundation that was set up, not you didn't set it up, but somebody else did. They look after all the tax filings. They look after actually sending the money to the charities that you want to receive the money, and all of that. So the donor advised fund is like a private foundation, but it's a bit more efficient from an administrative perspective. And you can involve your children in that giving just like you can with a private foundation. A lot of families are opting for these because they're an efficient way to give. You can separate the timing of your tax savings from the timing the charity gets the money. Um, and some people want to build up like an endowment a little bit,
Okay.
build up a bunch of money in that foundation over time, and give more away. Um, I think what I would encourage people to do if they do set up donor advised funds or private foundations is to make sure you do give, right?
Yeah.
And the government does have something called a disbursement quota, where every year you have to give away a certain amount of money because they want to see money going out to the charitable sector, which is great. It should be going out to the charitable sector, and that disbursement quota is 3.5% a year on the first million. Above a million, it's now 5%. So you're going to be giving away something every year. But yeah, you don't want to hoard your money. Like that's not the purpose of setting aside charitable dollars. You want to use it for good purpose.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's a bit of the complaint, right, around foundations and the amount of money that's still held within foundations and I guess now donor advised funds across the country is it actually being put to good use in the charitable space and for purposes of which it was originally designated, right? To actually affect a positive impact in the charitable sector. So,
And that's why I would encourage people who have set up donor advised funds or want to, or a foundation, to make giving a year round exercise. A lot of families will get together as a family twice a year, maybe June, November, and have a conversation about what charities they're going to support as a family. And you can do it together as a family, or you can say to each family member, "Here, you can give away this amount of money, you can give away this amount of money," and so forth. And everyone chooses their own charities they want to support.
yeah.
If you're going to do it that way, um, that can be a very unifying experience for families. It's a way to transition or pass those generous values on to the next generation by doing this as a family together.
Yeah.
Well, don't keep your giving from your kids. Let your kids understand what you're doing and involve them in giving.
How should somebody understand a community foundation versus a private foundation versus a donor advised fund?
So A community foundation is a public foundation. It's not the only kind of public foundations that are out there. I think most of the big banks have all set up public foundations. Um, and within these public foundations, whether it's a community foundation or one at your bank or whatever, you can set up these donor advised funds, these sleeves where you can contribute and then you decide where the money goes every year. And then there are some independent ones. There's a Canadian National Christian Foundation, which is a public foundation. There's another one called Canada Gives. Um, there's a bunch of them out there, and you can set up a donor advised fund inside any one of them. If you're going to give away, I would suggest, let's pick a number, $50,000, $100,000 over the course of 5 years, or more than that. You might want to consider setting up a donor advised fund with a foundation. Your community foundation will distribute funds typically anywhere you want them to go. You want to ask the foundation, are you going to restrict where I can send my donations to?
Right.
Most will
Yeah.
let you send donations anywhere, most, but you want to ask the question, say, are there any restrictions on where you allow me to donate my money? Because when you put money into a public foundation, a donor advised fund, it's no longer your money. It's actually money that belongs to the foundation,
Yeah.
but you're advising the foundation on where to send it. So we ask them if there's any restrictions on that. Most don't have restrictions, but some might. So ask that question. One thing about the community foundation is if you want to help your own geographic community, they'll have all the insights into where the needs are. Um, but I think they'll also allow you to normally give to wherever you want to give.
Wherever you want to. Yeah, for sure. Okay, great. So moving on to maybe some policy issues here that we've got in Canada. I mean, you've been a public voice on Canadian tax policy for quite a number of years now. When you think of Canada's tax environment today, is it encouraging, discouraging, transformational gifts of any kind? Where do you see policy around philanthropy and charitable giving going in Canada right now?
Well, the good news is that the issue of giving and philanthropy it's an important topic for Canadians in general, and the government sees it as being important. And as a general rule, making changes to our tax law that will hurt charitable giving, has been sort of a taboo thing. It would be political. I will call it political suicide, but would not be very popular. And
Yeah.
so for the most part, the governments have avoided making changes that are not favorable. Having said that, in the last couple of years, there have been some concerning discussions. I won't say tax law changes, but discussions in the government around giving. And in particular, there's a couple things that come to mind there. One is 2 years ago, the government introduced new rules around something we call the alternative minimum tax. What this is a tax that can apply to you if you're taking advantage of too many tax deductions and credits and tax benefits. Government says, well, you should pay a certain minimum amount of tax. That's the rules say in a nutshell. So what they did was they changed the rules around charitable giving to limit how much tax benefit you could get from making a gift. Now they got a lot of criticism for that. And they backed off on that a little bit. They tweaked the rules to make sure that people still got the benefits that they were getting before.
Mm.
But that was concerning that they even thought about that.
Yeah.
And I wrote about it, and I wrote an article about that in the Globe and Mail at the time, because, as I said earlier, what we're seeing is that the people who are larger income earners and are accustomed to giving are now giving more. And so those are the people that would be most impacted by these alternative minimum tax rules, where you don't get a full tax relief for your gifts.
Mm.
So they
Yeah.
backed up on that, but it was concerning that they even thought of that. Now, what's also happened since that time is there's been discussions. There are different parliamentary committees, and the Standing Committee on Finance in 2024, in December of 2024, came up with 400 recommendations. Okay, so they come up with all kinds of recommendations that they hand to the government as the government starts to put together its federal budget. And one of those recommendations was to eliminate the tax benefits of giving to charities of faith. There are very few people out there, but there are a few, not many, but a few, who believe that giving to a church or a synagogue or pretty much any other kind of religious organization should not be subsidized by the government by way of donation tax credits. That was very, very concerning. And so I wrote an article about that, and I dug into it a little deeper, by the way, because I wanted to find out why was this recommendation made. So I dug into it. I realized that suggestion had come from one special interest group out in BC, that suggested to their MP, who suggested to the Standing Committee on Finance that this change should be made. So it was one small voice in the whole country. Yet that Standing Committee on Finance looked at it and said, yeah, let's recommend this. Now, at the time, I then contacted every single member of that Standing Committee on Finance, which had 12 members to it. And because the Liberal government had a majority, formed the minority government at the time, they had the most people on the committee. Conservatives had the next most, then the NDP, then the Bloc, I think, had one person. So I reached out to every one of them to ask them, how did you vote on this and why? On this particular recommendation. I published this in the Globe and Mail. I'm not sharing information I haven't shared publicly before. I heard back from all of the MPs, with the exception of the Liberal MPs. I'm not taking sides here. I just want you to know that if you have an MP, you need to understand their view of this topic.
Yeah,
If
sure.
it's important to you, you find out their view. So I'm not overly concerned today that it's going to pass into law, because the government did not take that recommendation and put it into the federal budget. They didn't. Would that recommendation ever pop up again in another annual report from the Standing Committee on Finance? You can bet we'll all be watching to
Yeah,
see.
yeah,
And if it does, I'll be writing something about it. So I'm hopeful that maybe it's died on the vine, that whole idea of limiting donation tax credits for faith-based organizations. But it's something we need to be vigilant about watching, because it seems that when it comes to certainly faith-based organizations, there's no shortage of pressure from various groups within the government, individuals, even MPs, to limit benefits and rights.
yeah,
So we just got to watch it.
yeah. Okay. Any policy changes that you would want them to make?
Yeah, for sure. And I've suggested some things. Right now, we get donating shares, stocks, bonds, mutual funds to charity gives us a great tax benefit. I like that. I think they should do the same thing with private company shares and with real estate.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think that would encourage some even larger gifts to charity. I think that would be helpful. I would love to see the donation tax credits be a little more generous than they even are now.
Hmm.
In Ontario, for example, if you receive $1 of income and you pay tax on that, and you take that dollar and donate it to charity, you don't quite get back all of that tax that you paid on that dollar. Which is not true in a lot of provinces, but in Ontario, it's not. It's just the way the math works. So you can't take $1 of income, give it away, and then be neutral from a tax point of view. So there's a couple things like that I think should be changed in a couple different provinces. Alberta's the opposite. If you give $1, you're going to get back more than $1. You'll get back more than the tax that you've paid on that dollar if you're in the highest tax bracket. So, but most provinces, it's not like that. So I would probably be a little more generous with some of those donation tax credits. And I would try to do something to encourage the average Canadian to give again and give more. So we're not seeing that. And maybe that's just a matter of trying to make life more affordable for people. Maybe that comes with growth in our economy. We're not in great shape in Canada in terms of everything from business investment to income levels to has not headed in the right direction and has not improved even in the last year or two. So once that turns around, and hope it can, then let's hope people become more generous.
Very good. Thank you. Is there an avenue or a channel by which CEOs or EDs can connect through a family office to the families? Is there an open door to that, or is that more of a highly relationally based entree?
Well, I think if I were an ED of a charity, um, I'd be looking to build relationships with not only donors. That's the first priority, I think.
Yeah, sure.
I would try to build relationships with some influential accountants, lawyers, investment advisors in the community as well, who may have clients who might be interested in the charities that you represent. I think by and large, where we have failed as an industry, when I talk about I'm talking about the investment, the financial services industry. Where we probably don't do a very good job, or we've maybe failed a bit, is having those regular conversations with clients about their philanthropy. I still try to encourage advisors to have these conversations, and more are having them. And sometimes those conversations do turn to, what charities should I support? Now, we don't like to impose our values on other clients. We try to help them explore what their values are and help them identify charities. But when your charity is front of mind to lawyers, accountants, investment advisors, insurance advisors
Hmm.
in the community, it could probably only serve you well in the long run.
Yeah.
So building those relationships, and so hopefully over time that will lead to some introductions to some families that might be interested in giving.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So not just the family office model, obviously, but lots of professional advisors.
Our firm, we're called a family office. We're like the coming together. If you are not familiar with the family office, what it is, we're like the coming together of an accounting firm, a law firm, and a portfolio or investment management firm all in one. That's kind of the easiest way to describe it. So we'd look after all those things for many of our clients all in seamlessly in house. So you can kind of, if you break down those silos into accounting, legal, investments, building a relationship with all those types of professionals in your community is probably a good idea. And family offices, if there aren't that many of us around, would also be good to build relationships with.
Yeah. No, that's great. Tim, any just sort of final either awareness that we should have as far as the philanthropy from your perspective, or even just the nature of charities today and the challenges that they're facing? Any sort of final thoughts on that?
There's something I like to talk about sometimes called the poverty mentality,
Mm,
and it's something that really prevents people from giving. And if we can just get people to stop thinking about to change that mentality, it will help everybody. But I'll share with you a quick story. You know my family, so we have kids now. They're in their 20s now, but when they were little, we went on this cruise. We stopped in St. Thomas. We got off the ship, and we went to a little cafe on the hillside. And we were sitting there, and as we were sitting at this table having lunch, we saw there was a parrot sitting on a little perch, like literally 10 feet away. So my son, when he says, "Daddy, why doesn't that bird fly away? He's not flying away." And I'm looking at this, sure enough, this parrot's just sitting there. So I said, "Well, that's a good question. Let's go ask this parrot keeper, this man that was looking after the parrots, why he doesn't fly away." Um, and so we went and asked the parrot keeper that question. I thought he was going to say, "Well, we clip his wings, he can't fly." That's not actually true. That wasn't it. So he said, "Well, we teach the parrot that he's safer when he grasps onto that perch. They feed him there and everything, and he learns that that's his safety and security. If he lets go of the perch, he feels unsafe." And people are kind of like that with their money.
yeah.
People grab onto that money like it's their safety and the security and they don't feel like they can give because they feel like if they give too much, they're going to be impacted negatively by that, or they're going to be hurt by that. Where when you ask the question, when does somebody really realize they're actually truly financially free?
Mm,
It's when they give some money away and realize it didn't impact their lifestyle at all.
right. Yeah.
That's when they actually are free. So who's freer? Is it the individual who grasps on their money without giving it away, or is it the person that gives money away, realizing, hey, I can do this? So anyway, I thought I'd share that analogy in case it's ever helpful to anybody in having conversations with individuals about giving. It's but the financial advice, if you're talking to lawyers, accountants, advisors, share with them that story because because they're the ones that can actually very easily encourage their clients to give more than they are,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
and maybe help them to understand you can give away more than you are and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, if that's
No,
helpful.
that's great. Tim, thank you. And thank you for all that you do with not only the influence that you have in writing and with the families that you serve, but thank you just for your continued support of the charitable sector in Canada and even your volunteer work with the foundation in Burlington. So we appreciate your insights and just great to spend this time with you today. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, David. It was a lot of fun, and we'll do it again sometime.
Okay, sounds good.